You don't need a cockpit to be a fighter pilot. You just need the alarm. For 3 years, Rachel Coleman flew nothing but a red pen across sixth-grade quizzes. Kestrel Air Force Base wasn't glamorous. Base housing, a commissary, a school with a faded eagle on the gym wall. Rachel had taken a job in September. Cardigans now, sensible shoes, fractions, and kickball disputes. Nobody asked why she never flinched at the base's low flyovers that made windows hum. She'd glance up, note the aircraft type without meaning to, and go back to grading. A thin, pale mark ran along her forearm, always under her sleeve. If asked, she said she'd fallen off a bike. It wasn't a lie she felt good about. At 10:42 that Tuesday, the intercom crackled with its usual chime, then a different tone followed. Higher. Flatter. Wrong. Attention on base. This is not a drill. Scramble. 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 26 sixth graders looked up, curious, already whispering. Rachel did not look up. She was already standing. Her chair scraped back before she decided to move it. Her hand drifted toward a shoulder that hadn't worn a harness strap in 3 years. Tyler, front row, blinked. Ms. Coleman? You okay? Her eyes had gone past the cinderblock walls, toward the flight line 2 miles east, where she could already hear engines spinning to life. She knew that sound in her sternum before her ears caught up. Ms. Coleman, Tyler said again. You went kind of pale. She exhaled slowly, forced her hand back to her side, and gave him the smallest, tightest smile a person can manage while their whole body is somewhere else. I'm fine, Tyler. Everybody stay in your seats. She did not sound fine. 3 years of silence had just cracked, quietly, down the middle. One more time. Drop where you're watching from, hit subscribe, and like this if you want more. It gets bigger than a classroom. Rachel moved to the window despite herself, one hand flat against the glass, watching two shapes taxi fast toward the runway. Gray, sharp-nosed, twin-tailed. F-15C Eagles, engines already past idle. She counted them by instinct. 2 ship. Alert birds, already fueled and armed. Something real had come up on radar. Principal Dana Reyes appeared in the doorway. Phone pressed to her ear, face tight. Rachel, I need you to keep them calm. Live scramble, not a drill. Base says stay put. Copy, Rachel said. The word left her mouth clean and automatic before she caught herself. Reyes paused half a second too long. Copy, understood. Rachel corrected, too fast. Reyes didn't push it, 26 kids and an alarm to worry about, and hurried off toward the office. The sound hit the glass a half-second later, a deep roar that vibrated up through the floor tiles and into her chest. Several kids yelped, covering their ears. One girl started crying quietly. A boy stood on his chair until Rachel caught his eye and pointed him back down without a word. She watched the jet rotate off the runway, gear folding up clean, nose pitching skyward steeper than any airliner she'd flown as a passenger. Her hand, without permission, had curled into the shape of a throttle. She unclenched it slowly. The second Eagle followed, afterburner glowing pale orange even in daylight, and then both were gone, swallowed into low gray clouds to the east, climbing hard toward whatever had triggered this on an ordinary Tuesday. The classroom went quiet. 26 kids stared at her. Ms. Coleman, Tyler said slowly. How do you know it was going to do that? The steep part. Rachel opened her mouth, closed it again. She didn't have an answer that a sixth grader, or anyone else in this building, was supposed to hear. She never got the chance to answer Tyler. The classroom phone buzzed, the internal line, not the intercom. Reyes again, voice clipped. Rachel, sorry to interrupt. Base Ops called the office. They want volunteers with any prior military radio experience to help man phones. Half the admin staff's out sick. You didn't put anything like that on your sub-application, did you? A pause. No, Rachel said. Nothing like that. She hated how easily it came out. Reyes sighed, already distracted by something else on her end. Didn't think so. Never mind. I'll ask the front office volunteers. Just keep them settled, okay? I'll send someone to cover your class in 20. The line went dead. Rachel stood very still for a moment, one hand resting on the window frame, watching the empty runway where the Eagles had been. The flight line beyond it had gone from routine morning traffic to something tighter, faster. Ground crews jogging instead of walking. A fuel truck peeling out toward the hangars at a speed that would earn a write-up on any normal day. She recognized that particular kind of controlled chaos. She caused it herself, more than once, on the other end of a radio. Down the hall, she heard boots, real boots, government issue, moving fast against tile. A master sergeant she vaguely recognized from the commissary line, gray at the temples, wearing a maintenance squadron patch, jogged past the classroom door toward the office, phone already at his ear. He glanced sideways through the door window as he passed. His stride broke, just slightly, just for a step. He kept moving, but his eyes had caught on something. Her stance, maybe still angled toward the window like she was tracking traffic on approach. Or the way her weight was braced, feet shoulder width, like she was standing a flight line and not a classroom floor. Rachel didn't know his name yet. He, it turned out, already half recognized hers. The master sergeant's name was Frank Walsh, and he'd spent 19 years turning wrenches on fighter jets. He didn't stop walking. He didn't confirm anything to himself yet. But by the time he reached the front office, he'd already pulled up something on his phone. A photo, old, grainy, from a change of command ceremony 4 years back. He stared at it for 3 full seconds before pocketing the phone and stepping inside. "Ma'am," he said to the office secretary, "who's the substitute in Reyes's 6th grade room?" The secretary blinked at him. "Ms. Coleman?" "What?" Walsh didn't answer. He was already dialing. 2 miles east, inside the base's radar approach control room, the actual emergency had stopped being routine. The two-ship of F-15CS, call signs Python 1 and Python 2, had been scrambled to intercept an unidentified contact drifting through restricted airspace near the base's northern boundary. What they'd found instead was worse. Python 2's wingman, a young first lieutenant only 4 months out of formal training, had entered a thick, disorienting cloud layer mid-intercept and lost the horizon entirely. His voice came over the radio too fast, too high. "Python 2 is... I don't have a good picture up here. Instruments are... I think my attitude indicators tumbled." Lieutenant Kevin Doyle, running the approach desk that morning, keyed his mic with the calm of someone who had never actually talked a disoriented pilot back down before. "Python 2, believe your instruments. Wings level, maintain altitude. I think I am." The kid's voice cracked. Not panic yet. Close to it. Doyle glanced sideways at his senior controller's empty chair. Out sick, like half the staff that week, and felt something cold settle low in his stomach. He needed someone who actually knew what disorientation sounded like from the inside. He just didn't know yet that someone was 2 miles away, sitting in a classroom, grading fractions. Frank Walsh burst into the approach control room without knocking, breathless, his phone still gripped tight in one hand. "Lieutenant Doyle, there's a woman substitute teaching at the elementary school, Coleman. I think she's former fast mover. I think she might be exactly who you need right now." Doyle didn't look up from his console, one hand still keyed to the mic, sweat starting at his hairline. "I don't have time for a maybe, Sergeant. I've got a disoriented pilot at 11,000 feet. I'm not asking you to have time. I'm asking you to send someone to get her." "Based on what?" "A hunch. Based on 19 years of knowing what a fighter pilot's hands do when they hear a jet spin up." Walsh's voice didn't rise, but it didn't waver either. "I watched her flinch at exactly the moment Python 1 rotated. Not startled. Tracking it." Doyle exhaled hard, already shaking his head, already halfway back to the radio. "Sergeant, with respect, I don't have the bandwidth for civilian volunteers right now. Especially not a school teacher. She's not a... I need actual controllers, actual pilots on this net, not somebody's substitute." Doyle's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the scope where Python 2's altitude readout was starting to wobble in a way he didn't like. "Get her out of my flight line's business, and let me do my job." Frank Walsh stood there a second longer, weighing whether to push it further. Then he turned and walked out without another word. But he didn't head back toward the maintenance hangars. He headed for the school. Behind him, over the speaker, Python 2's voice climbed another half octave. Something's wrong. I can't tell up from down anymore." Doyle's hand tightened on the mic. He was out of easy answers, and he knew it. Walsh reached the school at a dead run, badge already out for the front desk before he'd even fully stopped moving. I need to speak with Miss Coleman. Now, it's a base emergency. The secretary, rattled by the alarm and the scramble, and now a sprinting maintenance sergeant, didn't argue. She buzzed the classroom. Rachel was already at the door when Reyes's temporary cover teacher arrived to take over. Some instinct in her had been counting down to this moment since the intercom first crackled. She stepped into the hallway to find a stranger with gray at his temples and desperation in his eyes. Ms. Coleman. Frank Walsh, Maintenance Squadron. I don't have time to explain how I know, but I think you can help us. We've got a pilot up there losing his horizon, and the guy running approach control doesn't want a schoolteacher anywhere near his radio. Rachel's face didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. A door long bolted shut, easing open half an inch. What's his altitude and airspeed? She asked, already walking. Walsh blinked. You're not even going to tell me I'm wrong? Answer the question, Sergeant. 11,000, indicated 240 and dropping. Attitude. Tumbling. He says he can't tell up from down. Rachel's jaw tightened, the first visible reaction she'd allowed all morning. Classic somatogravic illusion. In cloud, accelerating, no visual horizon. His inner ears lying to him and his guts agreeing with the lie. They reached the parking lot. Walsh's truck was already running. Lieutenant Doyle isn't going to let you near that radio, he warned, pulling out of the lot faster than base speed limits technically allowed. He won't have a choice, Rachel said quietly, staring out at the gray sky, where somewhere above the cloud deck, a young man was fighting his own body for control of an airplane. Not once he hears me talk him down. She didn't say how she knew. She didn't need to, not anymore. The approach control building smelled like burnt coffee and cold sweat. Rachel pushed through the door 2 steps ahead of Walsh, and every head in the room turned. Lieutenant Kevin Doyle stood up so fast his chair rolled back and hit the wall. Absolutely not. Sergeant, I told you. Lieutenant. Rachel's voice was flat, quiet, and it cut through the room anyway. What's Python 2's current airspeed and heading? Doyle stared at her. Cardigan, sensible shoes, a substitute teacher's laminated badge still clipped to her collar. Ma'am, with respect, this is an active Air Force emergency. I need you to step outside. Airspeed and heading, Rachel repeated, not moving. Over the speaker, the young pilot's voice broke through again, ragged. I don't know which way's down anymore. I think I'm banked. I can't. Doyle's hand hovered over the mic, torn between throwing this stranger out and the 11,000 feet of empty sky, where a panicking 24-year-old was seconds from doing something catastrophic to his own aircraft. You don't know his airspeed, Rachel said. It wasn't a question. You're vectoring him blind. I know how to run an intercept. Then you know somatogravic illusion doesn't fix itself with believe your instruments. You have to give him something physical to hold on to. A number, a hand position, something his body can grab that isn't his own inner ear lying to him. Doyle's jaw worked. Around the room, 2 junior controllers had gone very still, watching. Who are you? Doyle said low. To know that. Rachel didn't answer right away. Her eyes had drifted, just for a second, to the small brass plate on the wall behind him. A squadron memorial plaque, names etched in neat rows, one column titled Missing in Action. Give me the headset, Lieutenant, she said instead. Or watch him die, finding out the hard way. Doyle didn't move. Not because he was defiant, because he genuinely didn't know what to do with a substitute teacher who talked about somatogravic illusion like she'd lived inside one. The radio crackled again, worse now. Python 2, say altitude. That was Python 1, the flight lead, his own voice tightening as he orbited above the cloud deck, unable to help, unable to see his wingman. 6,000, I think, descending. I can't get it to stop. 6,000. Losing altitude fast, in cloud, with a pilot who no longer trusted his own body. Frank Walsh stepped up beside Doyle, voice low, urgent. Lieutenant, I've been wrenching on jets 19 years. I've never once been wrong about a pilot's hands. Give her the headset. A senior voice cut in over the room's second radio. Colonel Harmon, Base Ops Commander, monitoring from the tower and clearly not liking what he was hearing. Approach, what's the holdup on that frequency? Give me options, not silence. That decided it faster than anything Rachel or Walsh had said. Doyle yanked the headset off and shoved it toward her, jaw tight, pride visibly folding under the weight of a kid's life. You get one shot. If you get him killed, I won't, Rachel said, already settling the headset over her ears with the unconscious ease of someone who'd worn one 10,000 times before. She keyed the mic. Her voice, when it came out, was different than it had been all morning. Lower, steadier, stripped of every ounce of classroom warmth. Python 2, this is approach. I need you to stop flying the airplane for 1 second and just listen to my voice. A pause. Then faint, disbelieving, Who is this? Someone who's been exactly where you are, Rachel said. Now do exactly what I say. Wings level, Rachel said. I don't care what your gut tells you. Right hand on the stick, left hand flat on your knee. Feel your knee. That's real. That's down. Silence on the line, then a shaky breath. Copy, knee is down. Good. Now look at your attitude indicator only. Not the horizon you think you feel. The little airplane on the gauge. Where's it sitting relative to the line? Nose low, left wing down. Then roll wings level using the gauge, not your body. Small, smooth input. Your inner ear is going to scream at you that you're turning the wrong way. Ignore it. The gauge doesn't lie. Your ear does. In the control room, nobody breathed. Doyle stood frozen by his own console, staring at the woman in the cardigan like she'd swapped bodies with someone else entirely. Over the radio, metal creaked faintly under G-load as the young pilot fought his own instincts and rolled toward what his body insisted was the wrong direction. Altitude 4,200, a controller called out, voice tight. I've got the horizon, Python 2 said suddenly, wonder cutting through the fear. I've got it. Wings are level. Don't celebrate yet, Rachel said, calm as still water. Confirm airspeed, then bring the nose up smooth, 5 degrees, no more. You're not out of the woods until you're above 3,000 and climbing. Frank Walsh, watching from the doorway, allowed himself the smallest exhale. Beside him, Doyle finally found his voice quiet, almost to himself. That's not classroom talk. That's not volunteer talk. Where in the hell did you learn to do that? Rachel didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on the scope, on the small blinking symbol that represented a young man's life climbing back through 4,000 feet. Later, Lieutenant, she said. He's not out yet. 3,200, climbing, the controller called. Airspeed 210 and stable. Python 2, Rachel said. How do you feel? A long breath crackled over the radio. Shaky, embarrassed, alive. Alive's the only one that matters today. Her voice softened, just slightly, the first crack of warmth since she'd put the headset on. You did the hard part. You trusted the gauge over your gut. That's the whole job, every single time. Copy that, the kid said, and this time his voice held steady. Thank you, whoever you are. Rachel didn't answer that part. She kept her eyes on the scope as Python 2 leveled off, rejoined loosely on Python 1's wing, and both aircraft turned back toward Kestrel's runway, their earlier emergency reduced now to a formality of checklists and fuel states. She talked him through the approach anyway, glide path, gear down, flap settings, a runway he could have found blind by now, but that she wasn't willing to leave to chance. When the tower controller finally confirmed both aircraft down and rolling, safe, engines spooling toward idle, something in Rachel's shoulders dropped half an inch that hadn't dropped in 3 years. She set the headset down slowly, like it might still be listening. The room stayed silent for 3 full seconds. Then Frank Walsh started clapping. Just once, then stopped himself, unsure if it was appropriate, unsure of anything except that he'd just watched something extraordinary happen in a room that smelled like burnt coffee. Doyle hadn't moved from where he stood. He was staring at Rachel the way you'd stare at a locked door that had just quietly opened on its own. Who? He said again. Are you? This time it wasn't a challenge. It was a question he actually wanted answered. Rachel exhaled, and for the first time all day, didn't have a ready lie. Before Rachel could decide how much to say, the room's side door opened, and a full colonel walked in, silver eagle insignia catching the fluorescent light. Everyone in the room straightened automatically, chairs scraping back, Doyle's hands snapping to something close to attention. Colonel Mark Harmon didn't look at any of them first. He looked at Rachel. He'd been listening from the tower on the command net the entire time. Every word, every clipped instruction, the exact cadence of someone talking a disoriented pilot back from the edge of a fatal spiral. That voice, Harmon said slowly, walking closer, studying her face the way you study something you're trying to place from a much younger memory. I know that voice. Rachel held very still. Colonel, I was just... Don't, he said, not unkindly. Don't tell me you were just a substitute helping out. I've heard that exact cadence exactly once before in my life, on a recording no civilian supposed to have access to. He turned to the room's data terminal, keyed in a request with the ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, and waited while the system churned through personnel archives that required clearance most of the room didn't have. Doyle watched, jaw tight, dread and curiosity fighting for space on his face. The screen returned a single hit, a service record, most of it blacked out in thick redacted bars, dates and deployments scrubbed to nothing. But one line remained visible at the top, impossible to redact, because it was the only thing anyone in this room actually needed to know. Call sign, Cyclone. Frank Walsh made a small sound in the back of his throat. Harmon looked up from the screen, and for the first time that morning, his voice wasn't a colonel's voice at all. Just a man who'd read after-action reports about a name he'd assumed belonged to someone long retired, or long gone. Cyclone, he said quietly. You're supposed to be a ghost story we tell new pilots. I'm not a ghost story, Rachel said quietly. I'm just someone who stopped flying. Nobody stops flying like that, Harmon said. Not voluntarily. He wasn't wrong, and Rachel didn't correct him. The room had gone very still, every controller pretending to look at their own screens while listening to every word. Doyle stood frozen near his console, running the morning back through his head. The way she'd known airspeed and heading before he'd offered them. The way she'd diagnosed a physiological illusion most junior pilots couldn't spell. The flat, practice comm of someone who talked exactly this kind of emergency down more times than she'd ever admit out loud. Cyclone, Harmon said again, testing the name like it might dissolve if he said it too fast. You flew with the 94th out of Langley. Before that classified assignment nobody below full colonel gets briefed on. I read your file during a joint ops course 6 years ago. The details were sanitized, but the outline wasn't. Single-handedly held an intercept picture together during an incident that never officially happened, according to the paperwork. The paperwork's usually right to stay quiet, Rachel said. The paperwork also said you were reassigned stateside for medical reasons and never returned to flight status. Harmon's eyes flicked, briefly, to the pale mark along her forearm, visible now where her sleeve had ridden up during the radio call. I'm guessing there's more to that story than a bicycle. Rachel didn't answer that either. Some things, even now, she wasn't ready to say out loud in a room full of strangers. Doyle cleared his throat, finally finding words, quieter than anything he'd said all morning. Mom, earlier, I told you to get out of my flight line's business. You did, Rachel said, no anger in it. Just fact. I was wrong. You were doing your job, she said. You just didn't know whose job you were also doing. Colonel Harmon didn't push further. Not there. Not in a room full of controllers who didn't need to hear it. But later, in a side office, more people would soon be calling by names Rachel had spent 3 years trying hard to forget. He asked anyway, gently. What happened, Coleman? She looked at the pale mark on her forearm like it belonged to someone else. Training accident. 2 years before I separated. Ejection seat doesn't care how good you are. It cares about milliseconds. Mine were half a second late. She didn't elaborate on what came after that half second, or on the wingman who hadn't gotten out at all. Some doors, even cracked open, only open so far. Harmon didn't push. He'd read enough redacted files to know when a line existed for a reason. Outside, the weather had turned faster than the morning brief predicted. What had been a low gray ceiling was thickening into something worse. Fog rolling in off the coast in slow, deliberate sheets, swallowing the flight line one hangar at a time. A junior controller's voice cut through the office door. sharper now, edged with a new kind of worry. "Colonel, we've got a problem." Solo student, T6 Texan, out on a cross-country in AV run. Weather closed faster than his divert options. He's burning fuel looking for a hole in this soup that isn't there. Harmon's jaw tightened. Rachel was already standing, the office chair scraping back the same way it had in a classroom 2 hours and one lifetime ago. "How much fuel?" she asked. 20 minutes. Maybe less. Rachel looked out the window at fog that had already swallowed the runway lights whole and felt something old and familiar settle back in her spine. The exact weight she'd spent 3 years pretending she didn't miss. "Give me a jet," she said. "I'm going up." Harmon didn't hesitate the way Doyle had, hours, or maybe just minutes, earlier. "She's not current," he said to the room at large, thinking out loud, weighing regulations against the kid's fuel gauge. "Hasn't logged flight hours in 3 years. Medical records probably still flag her." "Colonel," Rachel said, "you can ground me on paperwork after we've got a fuel-critical student back on the deck. Not before." He studied her for exactly 1 second longer, then nodded once, sharp. "Walsh, get her a flight suit and a helmet from supply. Doyle, get me a 2-seat available now, not in 20 minutes. We've got a T-38 on the ramp doing instrument currency training," Doyle said, already moving. "Instructor pilot's Captain Reyes' husband. Actually, Nate Reyes. He's finishing pre-flight now. Small world, small base." Rachel filed that away without comment. Out on the frequency, the student's voice was climbing toward the specific, controlled panic of someone running out of options and altitude at the same time. "Approach, Texan 4-2. I don't have the runway environment in sight. I'm at 900 feet, and I think I need to declare an emergency." "Texan 4-2, hold your present heading and altitude," Doyle said into his mic, steadier now than he'd been all morning, borrowing calm from somewhere he hadn't had access to 2 hours ago. "Help is airborne in 6 minutes." Rachel was already halfway into a flight suit 3 sizes too broad through the shoulders, someone's old spare, smelling of jet fuel and static electricity. Frank Walsh handed her a helmet, hands not quite steady. "You sure about this?" "No," Rachel admitted, snapping the chin strap tight. "But I'm surer about this than I've been about anything in 3 years." Captain Nate Reyes, yes, married to the principal who'd sent Rachel to the front office that same morning without knowing any of this, met her on the ramp with the T-38 Talon's canopy already cracked open, engine spinning up to a low, patient whine. "Colonel says you're a former fast mover," Reyes shouted over the noise, handing her up into the back seat. "I'll fly it. You talk him down." "That work?" "That works," Rachel said, strapping in with hands that hadn't forgotten a single buckle sequence despite 3 years of silence. The canopy sealed. The world went quiet except for engine whine and her own pulse. They launched in a fog thick enough to swallow the runway behind them within seconds, climbing on instruments alone, popping out above the overcast into a blinding, indifferent blue sky that made the disaster below look almost peaceful. "Approach. Talon chase is airborne. Request vector to Texan 4-2, Reyes called. Doyle's voice, steadier now, fed them a heading. "Texan 4-2 is at your 2 o'clock, 8 miles, 800 feet, in and out of cloud." Rachel keyed her own mic, voice dropping into the same flat, practice calm that had talked Python 2 home an hour earlier. "Texan 4-2, this is Talon chase. We're inbound to join up on your wing and walk you down visually. I need you to trust me the way you trust a wingman, because that's exactly what I am right now." A young voice, scared and grateful in equal measure, answered immediately. "Copy, Talon chase. Please hurry." Below them, the fog bank stretched unbroken to the horizon, hiding a runway, a fuel gauge ticking toward empty, and a kid who had no idea help was about to arrive with the exact call sign etched into a redacted file 2 hours old. "Texan 4-2, turn left heading 270. We'll be in visual range in 90 seconds, Rachel said, watching the radar repeater in her back seat scope tick the gap closed between 2 blips. Reyes banked the Talon hard, G-force pressing Rachel into her seat, the horizon tilting sideways through a thin gap in the cloud deck below them. "There," Reyes said. "Tally. 10 o'clock low. A small white trainer emerged from the murk like something surfacing from deep water. Wings rocking slightly, nose wandering, the unmistakable signature of a pilot flying scared instead of flying the airplane. Texan 4-2, Talon chases you in sight, Rachel said. We're going to slide in on your left wing. Once you see us, all I want you to do is fly formation off me. Don't look at your instruments. Don't look at the fog. Look at my wingtip and match it. Copy. I see you. I see you. Relief cracked the kid's voice wide open. Reyes eased the Talon into position. Wingtip to wingtip, close enough that Rachel could see the young pilot's white-knuckled grip on his stick through his own canopy glass, 30 feet away and a lifetime of experience apart. Good, Rachel said. Now breathe. In formation, your only job is to not think. Let me do the thinking. Match my bank angle. Match my rate of descent. We're taking you down through the deck together. Fuel's a bingo, the kid said, voice tight again. Maybe 8 minutes. Then we don't waste a second of it panicking, Rachel said, steady as still water. Nose down 2 degrees with me now. 2 aircraft descended together into gray nothing, wingtip to wingtip, one flown by a man who trusted his training, and one flown by a woman remembering exactly why she used to love this, fog swallowing them both whole. Inside the cloud, the world became a uniform, featureless gray, no horizon, no ground, no sky. Only the dim shape of the Texans' wingtip lights 30 feet away, the only fixed point in a universe gone soft at the edges. 1,500 feet, Reyes called from the front seat, reading his own instruments while Rachel kept her eyes locked outside on the kid beside them. Texan 4-2, stay with me. You're doing great. Rachel's voice never wavered, even as the fog thickened enough to blur the edges of the other aircraft's fuselage. 1,000 feet. Runway should break out any second. I don't see anything. You will. Trust the formation, not your eyes. 800 feet. 700. The gray pressed close enough that Rachel could no longer see past the Texans' wingtip to anything beyond. No runway, no lights, nothing but another aircraft's shape and the numbers ticking down on her altimeter. 600 feet. Rachel felt her pulse climb for the first time all day. Not fear exactly, but the old familiar readiness that used to live permanently under her ribs. Then, all at once, the fog thinned to a gauzy curtain, and runway threshold lights bloomed out of the gray like something surfacing from underwater. Twin rows of white, dead ahead, exactly where they were supposed to be. Runway in sight. The kid's voice cracked with something close to joy. Then fly it, Rachel said. Break formation, land your airplane. You've got this. You've had this the whole time. The Texan peeled gently away, gear dropping, and Rachel watched it settle onto the runway in a clean, if slightly hard, landing, tires chirping once against wet pavement. A fuel-critical emergency, ending in exactly the anticlimax every good landing deserves. Reyes exhaled hard over the intercom. Nice work, Cyclone. It was the first time anyone had said the name to her face in 3 years, and it didn't feel like a ghost story at all. The climax of the morning wasn't over, though. It had simply moved to the ground. Reyes brought the T-38 around for their own approach. Fog still thick over Kestrel's runway. Visibility dropping now to under a quarter mile as the front fully rolled and off the coast. What had been a manageable ceiling 20 minutes earlier had collapsed into something closer to 0-0. No horizon, no runway environment, nothing but instruments and trust. Approach, Talon chase, requesting precision approach guidance, Reyes called. We're looking at minimums, maybe below. Doyle's voice answered immediately, sharper and more competent than it had sounded 3 hours earlier. Talon chase, radar contact, 8 miles on course, on glide path. Continue approach. Rachel watched the altimeter unwind. 3,000, 2,000, 1,500, while outside the canopy the world stayed uniformly, suffocatingly gray. Talon, 5 miles on glide path on course, Doyle called. Decision height in 2 minutes. Reyes's hands were steady on the stick, but his breathing had changed, shorter, more controlled, the sound of a pilot working right at the edge of his own currency in weather this bad. Nate, Rachel said quietly, using his first name for the first time. Talk to me. What's your personal minimum in this? A pause, honest. Lower than this on a good day. This isn't a good day. Then let's fly it together, Rachel said. You've got the stick. I've got the numbers. Call your altitudes out loud, and I'll call the corrections. Copy that. 500 feet. Rachel's eyes swept the instrument panel with the fluid, practiced rhythm of someone who'd flown 100 approaches worse than this one. A rhythm that had never actually left her. Only slept. 300 feet, Reyes called, voice tightening. Still nothing outside. Trust the needles, Rachel said. We're exactly where we're supposed to be. 100 feet, Reyes called, voice tight as a drawn wire. Decision height. I don't have the runway. This was the moment every instrument approach existed for. The exact second a pilot had to choose between trusting a needle or trusting fear. 50 feet to minimums, Rachel said, calm, flat, immovable. Hold your line. Don't chase it. Don't dip. The runway is exactly where the needles say it is. Reyes's hands didn't move an inch off center, though every instinct in a human body screamed to duck under and look. Decision height, Rachel said. Go around or land, call it now. A half-second of silence stretched into something that felt much longer. Then, through a thin curtain of fog peeling back like a stage curtain, runway lights bloomed directly ahead. Dead center, exactly on the numbers, exactly where trust in a set of instruments had promised they'd be. Runway. Reyes's voice cracked with relief. I've got it. Land the airplane, Rachel said, allowing herself, finally, the smallest exhale of the entire morning. The T-38 settled onto wet pavement with a firm double chirp of rubber, spoilers deploying, engines spooling back from a low howl to a manageable rumble. Water sprayed in twin white fans off the main gear as they decelerated down the center line. Fog still curling thick along both sides of the runway like something reluctant to let them go. Reyes exhaled a long, shaking breath as they slowed toward taxi speed. That's the worst approach I've ever flown. That's the best approach you've ever flown, Rachel corrected quietly. There's a difference. Ahead, through thinning fog, the shapes of a fire truck and two staff cars waited at the end of the runway. Lights flashing, a small crowd already gathering that had no earthly reason to be there, except that word travels fast on a small base. And today's word had traveled faster than most. The T-38 rolled to a stop on the taxiway, engines winding down to idle, fog still drifting low across the tarmac in slow gray ribbons. Reyes popped the canopy and cold, damp air rushed into the cockpit, carrying the smell every pilot knows in their bones. Jet fuel, wet concrete, ozone from the storm still hanging over the base. Rachel unstrapped with hands that had gone slightly unsteady now that the job was finished, the way hands sometimes do only after the emergency ends. Frank Walsh was the first one to reach the jet, practically running across the wet tarmac, grin splitting his face despite the drizzle soaking his uniform. Ma'am, Cyclone, that was the single best formation join and precision approach I've watched in 19 years, and I've watched a lot. Rachel climbed down the ladder slowly, boots meeting wet pavement, legs adjusting to solid ground after 20 minutes suspended in gray nothing. Colonel Harmon stood at the edge of the small crowd, Doyle beside him, both men silent, watching her the way you watch something you didn't fully believe existed until it landed in front of you. Doyle stepped forward first. He didn't say anything right away. Instead, slowly, deliberately, he came to attention and rendered a proper salute, the kind reserved for someone whose rank he didn't officially know, but whose authority he no longer doubted for a second. Rachel stood there a moment, rain misting her hair, the borrowed flight suit hanging loose on her shoulders, and felt 3 years of careful anonymity dissolve into something she wasn't sure she was ready for yet. She returned the salute anyway. Old habits, it turned out, didn't need 3 years of practice to come back exactly right. Somewhere behind the small crowd, a school bus idled at the base gate, waiting to take 26 sixth graders home to parents who had no idea what their substitute teacher had actually done that Tuesday morning. Colonel Harmon waited until the small crowd's applause, quiet, uncertain applause, The kind people give when they're not sure exactly what they're clapping for, but know it matters, had died down before he spoke. "Miss Coleman," he said, deliberately formal, "on behalf of Kestrel Air Force Base, I owe you an apology for the reception you got this morning, and a debt I'm not sure the Air Force has a form for." "You don't owe me anything, Colonel," Rachel said. "I'd have done it whether anyone believed me or not." "That," Harmon said, "is exactly why you're getting the apology anyway." Doyle, still standing at something close to parade rest, finally found the words he'd been circling for the last 10 minutes. "Ma'am, Cyclone, I need to say something. I told you to get out of my flight line's business. I was wrong about that in every possible way, and I want you to know I know it." Rachel studied him for a moment, the same young lieutenant who'd shoved her toward the door 3 hours earlier, now standing rain-soaked and humbled in front of the entire flight line. "You weren't wrong to protect your operation, Lieutenant," she said. "You were only wrong about who I was. Most people are these days. I've gotten good at making sure of it." "What?" Doyle asked, and for the first time it wasn't a challenge, just genuine curiosity. "Why hide something like this?" Rachel looked past him, toward the fog still clinging low to the runway, toward the ghost of a wingman she'd never quite stopped hearing in the quiet moments of ordinary days. "Because some stories," she said quietly, "are easier to carry if nobody's asking about them." Nobody pushed further. Some silences, everyone standing there understood, were owed the same respect as any salute. By the time the fog lifted that afternoon, the story had already spread across Kestrel Air Force Base the way stories do on small installations. Not through official channels, but through break rooms, chow lines, and a maintenance squadron group chat. Frank Walsh had started with a single photo of a redacted service record and 3 words, "Told you so." Rachel changed out of the borrowed flight suit in a base locker room that still smelled faintly of jet fuel, folding it carefully despite knowing she'd probably never wear one again. Principal Dana Reyes found her there, having finally connected the dots between "my husband just flew a 00 approach with a mystery substitute teacher," and "my substitute teacher apparently has a classified service record." "You could have told me," Reyes said, not accusing, just tired and a little stunned. "I could have," Rachel agreed. "I didn't know how to say it without it becoming the only thing people saw when they looked at me." Reyes considered that for a moment, then nodded slowly. "The kids are asking if you're coming back tomorrow." Rachel almost laughed. The first easy thing to almost happen all day. "Do they know?" "Tyler's convinced you're secretly a superhero." I didn't correct him. "Close enough," Rachel said quietly. Outside, the fog had thinned to ordinary afternoon haze, and somewhere on the flight line, ground crews were already logging the day's incidents in the flat, procedural language the Air Force used to file away things that had nearly gone catastrophically wrong. 2 save reports. 1 request for a records review. No casualties. No paperwork would ever fully capture what had actually happened between a scramble alarm at 10:42 and a wet runway 2 hours later. But then again, Rachel thought, the paperwork rarely did. It hadn't the first time either. The next morning, Rachel walked back into the same 6th grade classroom at 7:50 a.m., cardigan and sensible shoes exactly as before, as if the previous day hadn't happened at all. It had, though. She could tell by the way the room went quiet the second she walked in. Not the ordinary quiet of a classroom waiting for instructions, but a different kind, reverent and curious in equal measure. Tyler raised his hand before she'd even reached the whiteboard. "Ms. Coleman, is it true you flew a jet in the fog yesterday?" 25 other faces turned toward her, waiting. Rachel considered several answers. Deflection, denial, the same practiced vagueness that had carried her through 3 quiet years. None of them fit anymore. Some doors, once open, didn't close back to exactly where they'd started. "I used to fly jets," she said finally. "A long time ago. Yesterday, I helped some people who needed it. That's really all there is to it." "That's not all there is to it," Tyler said, grinning. "My dad said you're famous on the base group chat." A few kids laughed. Rachel felt the corner of her own mouth pull up, unbidden, the first easy smile she'd allowed inside these walls in 3 years. "Famous is a strong word," she said. "Now, who remembers what we were working on before the alarm interrupted us?" Groans rippled through the room. the universal sound of children being redirected back toward fractions after a much more interesting topic. But something had shifted, subtle and permanent, in the way they looked at her now, not as the substitute nobody bothered learning much about, but as someone whose ordinary cardigan had turned out to be hiding something extraordinary all along. Rachel picked up her red pen, and for the first time in 3 years, didn't feel like she was hiding anything at all. 3 weeks later, a small ceremony was held in the base auditorium. Nothing grand, no press, no public record, exactly the way Rachel had asked for it. Colonel Harmon presented her with a plain wooden plaque, the kind reserved for things nobody was allowed to describe on paper too specifically. Frank Walsh stood near the back, arms crossed, wearing the smallest, proudest grin of anyone in the room. Lieutenant Kevin Doyle stood near the front, having personally requested to attend on his own time. When Rachel caught his eye across the room, he gave her a small, genuine nod. No salute this time, just the quiet respect of one professional acknowledging another. Nate Reyes and his wife Dana sat together near the aisle. Dana still occasionally shaking her head in disbelief at the whole thing, like she expected someone to announce it had all been an elaborate drill. Harmon kept his remarks brief. Some people spend their whole careers chasing recognition, he said. Others spend years running from it. And somehow that makes them exactly the kind of person who deserves it most. Miss Coleman didn't ask for any of this. She just did the job in front of her, twice in one morning, without hesitation. Rachel accepted the plaque with the same quiet, unimpressed grace she'd shown the entire ordeal, said a short, genuinely humble thank you, and asked, pointedly, that the ceremony not run long, because she had lesson plans to finish for the next morning. Afterward, walking back across the darkened flight line toward her car, she paused once, looking up at the clear night sky where 2 eagles happened to be running a routine training sortie overhead, contrails catching the last orange light of sunset. She didn't feel the old ache watching them the way she once had. For the first time in 3 years, the sky above her felt like something she'd made peace with, rather than something she'd lost. Kestrel Air Force Base went back to ordinary after that, or as ordinary as a base ever gets. Jets still scrambled when they needed to. Fog still rolled in some mornings thick enough to close the runway. Kids still groaned over fractions at 7:50 a.m. sharp. But a few things had changed quietly, permanently. Lieutenant Kevin Doyle started running his approach desk differently. Asking more questions before assuming he had the full picture, listening a beat longer before deciding who did and didn't belong in his control room. Frank Walsh still swore, to anyone who'd listen, that he'd known the moment he saw her flinch at that engine spin up. Colonel Harmon quietly ensured a certain classified file got a small, careful addendum. Nothing dramatic, just enough that if anyone ever needed to know who Cyclone really was, the answer wouldn't stay buried forever. And Rachel Coleman kept teaching 6th grade math, red pen in hand, cardigan sleeves pulled down over a scar nobody asked about anymore, because everyone already understood, in a way small towns understand things without needing them spelled out. Some mornings, when the jets took off low and loud over the school, she still felt her hand drift toward a shoulder that hadn't worn a harness strap in years. She let it. There wasn't anything left to hide from that feeling anymore. If this story hit home, drop a comment telling us what you'd have done in Rachel's shoes. Reveal yourself the moment duty called, or stay quiet as long as you could. Hit that like button if you want more stories like this one, and subscribe so you don't miss the next hidden hero we bring you. Until next time, keep looking up. You never know who might be standing quietly beside you, waiting for the moment the sky needs them again.